Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 18. Izu's in his little shit era. Heart. The red lights vigilante known as Ivy had been stopping petty criminals and leaving them for the Mustafa police to round up for months, and Detective Tsukauchi didn't really give a shit. The city didn't let them allocate resources to that side of town because it was, quote, too far gone and, quote, not worth the infrastructure. It was a load of bullshit and just a fancy way of saying they didn't want to deal with it, so they would ignore it until it snuffed itself out. It wasn't going to snuff itself out. It had only been getting worse, and if some vigilante wanted to try and clean up the mess that the government refused to deal with, then good on them. Privately, he thought Ivy should be left to their business. Officially, Tsukauchi had been against this criminal from the beginning and was avidly hunting them down to get them off the streets. The case landed in his lap from some higher-up who knew nothing about what actually went down in the red lights district and was unlikely to ever check back in on the case. He was getting conflicting orders, so he followed whatever suited him. The city didn't want him wasting his time on Uptown? Okay, the vigilante isn't his problem then. You want me to find this vigilante? Well, I won't spend too much time on it since you said not to waste my time in the slums. That's how he had been operating the case, until several thugs got scooped up claiming a rabid child had jumped off a roof and handed them their asses. A couple claimed that they were a woman, so Tsukauchi wasn't really sure what to believe, but if there was even a chance that this Ivy was in fact a child, then Tsukauchi couldn't just let this go on. They had started to bring in gang members, and that was no doubt going to make them some powerful enemies. Those conflicting orders went from being a useful loophole to a red tape prison. Sure, he could officially use police resources and time to track Ivy down, but he still couldn't get feet on the ground to actually look for them. Ivy always used the criminals or a passersby phone to call in their takedowns, and they were always gone before police arrived on the scene. So Tsukauchi was stuck in the precinct interrogating random thugs and getting a whole lot of nowhere. All he knew was Ivy was fast, agile, and cunning. More than a few people said they were a, quote, snarky little shit as well. They fought with a knife and flashlight baton. They had no obvious quirk and didn't show any identifying features other than the fact that they were on the shorter side and had a lighter skin tone. He had technically been going against orders for a couple of months now. He couldn't get in trouble for where he spent his free time. He could just go and scope things out in an unofficial capacity, right? Well, yeah, he could, but still nothing. None of the locals would say a word about Ivy. They pretended they had no clue who he was talking about, even though it was clear they did, like keeping it a secret was some sort of inside joke. As ill-advised as it was, he even took to walking the streets at night, but no matter how many nights he spent in those streets, he saw neither hide nor hair of Ivy himself. The first real lead he'd gotten was yesterday night, when a call from Ivy was made from an untraceable number, likely a burner phone. It wasn't much of a lead, but Tsukauchi made sure all calls from that number were transferred straight to his personal phone, just in case. He was glad he did, because the very next night he got a call. Hello, this is Detective Tsukauchi. This is the second call we've received from an untraceable number. Are you the vigilante I've been trying to track for nearly a year? He said sardonically, hoping the snarky little shit, quote, comment was reliable and he could bait them into conversation. He could not bait them into conversation. They just shouted a location over him and then hung up. Well, at least the, quote, little shit part was reliable report. Detective Tsukauchi, huh? That was probably the narc that had been asking about him around town. A detective. They had a detective after him. Great. How come the city had funding to get cops on his ass, but no one else's? Looking at his phone, he used his teeth to pull off one of his gloves and save the number under narc. Ivy, thanks for the number. Texting is cheaper. Heart. Narc. Seriously? Ivy. Yeah, so make your point in one text or less, or I'll block you. Narc. I wanted a word, preferably spoken. Ivy. Well, I'm on block 10, so why don't you come pick up this goon and maybe I'll stick around to chat. XOXO. Okay, yeah, snarky little shit. That wasn't much of a lead, and he doubted the vigilante would stay on the scene, but it was worth a shot, and someone had to go pick up whoever Ivy had just caught. Since that phone call was transferred directly to him, then technically he had the jurisdiction to waste his own time rather than sending out some lower ranked officers and using up their, quote, less valuable time. So off he went. As he had suspected, by the time he showed up on the scene, Ivy was nowhere in sight. No one except a thug tied up in the alleyway was there, and they were still out cold. The night was silent, so Tsukauchi took a gamble he hoped might pay off and not just get himself blocked. Narc. What happened to our little chat? He heard a faint ding from the neighboring roof. Bingo. He whipped his head in the direction of the noise, but he still didn't see anything. Deciding it was worth the risk to end up talking to no one, he shouted out, Look, Ivy, I just want to talk. I'm not trying to bring you in. You're doing work that the city won't let us do. No response. Officially, I can't condone what you're doing. I was assigned your case, but we aren't permitted to, quote, waste time putting feet on the ground out here unless we're called. So unless you go off the rails, no one's going to come after you. And I'm not really expected to actually catch you. He added, hoping to gain some trust. Still, no response. The thug at his feet was starting to stir, so Tsukauchi decided he'd better put proper cuffs on him. He was pretty beat up. Usually, Ivy didn't use excessive force unless the crime was particularly heinous. What'd this guy do, anyway? I didn't hear much with you shouting over me and hanging up. I can't exactly arrest him just 'cause, he said, giving it one last try before he gave up. He felt his phone vibrate in his hand. Ivy. Attempted sexual assault. Victim is safe, but not willing to make a report in person. I will contact you tomorrow morning. Do not try to text me before then. I will block you. Well, that was leagues better than the nothing he'd been working with before. Izuku can't believe he forgot to turn the phone to silent. In his defense, he wasn't expecting anyone to ever contact him, and the phone didn't make a sound when the text conversation was already pulled up, so it hadn't chimed with any of the other texts Tsukauchi had sent. He will admit the detective intrigued him. He didn't trust him, not even a little bit, but he was intrigued. If he was telling the truth, then he could be a very helpful ally. But if he wasn't, well, that was a one-way ticket to an orphanage if Izuku let himself get caught, and that was not worth the risk. He had made a name for himself out here. Until the gang finally decided that he wasn't a real threat and realized he was just a nuisance at best, he could hold his own. He didn't need backup. He would test him tomorrow. He already had a plan. He just needed Wi-Fi for it. Tsukauchi didn't know what to expect when the vigilante contacted him the next day, but this was not it. PayPal, not a vigilante. Pay for my minutes and we can talk tonight. Narc. Are you actually serious? Ivy. Yeah, Mr. Cushy Job Money Bags. I'm from Uptown. I'm not made of cash. Pay up or stop texting me. Oh, Kami, they were serious. Okay, guess he's doing this. Narc. I'm not sending money to someone called not a vigilante. These texts are bad enough. Change the username and I'll send it. How much? Ivy. Okay, fair. I did not expect that to work. PayPal. Thorn in your side. Heart. 1,500 yen. Now quit texting me until I see the dough. Well, at least they were self-aware. He sent 3,000 yen. It was pocket change to him, and Ivy had been doing the job of law enforcement without payment for nearly a year. He could spare it. Plus, maybe he could buy his way into Ivy's good side. Hopefully he'd actually get a call and not just be scammed out of 3,000 yen. Izuku had asked for way more than any reasonable length phone call would cost, and Tsukauchi sent double. He was trying to buy himself into Ivy's good graces, and Izuku knew that, but that doesn't mean it wasn't working. It was spring break, and Izuku was hungry. He was taking anything he could get at this point. He wasn't sure he was actually going to call him, but now he felt obligated to. His stomach wouldn't stop grumbling, and he was pretty sure it was getting loud enough for Shinso to hear it in the quiet library. Luckily, he was too polite to say anything if he did hear it. Izuku had grown far more confident as Ivy. At this point, he had a mental map of every single foothold on this side of the city, and he could maneuver around fire escapes and rooftops just as fast as he could on street level. He was quick, and he was silent. Barring injury, he had been running around these streets every single night since his second patrol over 10 months ago. He had lost track of how many people he brought in or how many people he saved, but he couldn't forget how many people he had lost, no matter how hard he tried. He's sure if he didn't run himself to literal exhaustion every night, that number would keep him awake. So he made sure to never take a break long enough to fall back into the pit in his gut that he fell into after his first disastrous patrol. It wasn't healthy, and he had permanent bags under his eyes, but it was one of the only things keeping him going. The Shinsos and DJ wouldn't be enough to save him from the pit in his gut. He knew that for a fact from the few times he was forced to take a night or two off because of injury. No, Izuku couldn't be left to his own thoughts for any length of time, but Ivy could. Ivy was different, so Izuku forced himself to be Ivy as often as possible. Ivy was confident and capable and funny, but Izuku was just Deku. Ivy didn't have to cling onto anything in order to keep going, but Deku did. As confident as Ivy was, he'd never had to make a call to a detective that was possibly trying to trick him into giving up identifying information in order to take him down and throw him into the system. He was a bit nervous. He climbed his way onto the tallest building in Uptown, far away from any prying ears. Making sure his mask, both physical and metaphysical, were firmly in place, he hit call. It wasn't until 1 a.m. that his phone finally lit up with a call from Ivy. He picked up on the third ring. Detective Tsukauchi speaking. Hey, Detective Suka, what'd you need from little old me? Ivy responded. The voice was obviously fake, so unfortunately, he wasn't going to get any answers on their age or gender without having to ask. Ivy, it's good to hear from you. I have a few questions if you have the time, he responded, leaving the disappointment out of his tone. I figured as much. Why should I answer them? If you're not trying to take me in, as you said, then what's the point of reaching out to me to begin with? I don't know your motivations, and I don't have any reason to trust you. Why take the risk? What's in it for me? Ivy clipped back. They weren't going to beat around the bush. He could respect that. Tsukauchi thought before responding. He really wasn't expecting to get this far, and Ivy was right. They had no reason to answer any of his questions. What could he offer? I can offer my support in an unofficial capacity, as well as any strings I can pull around here to make your job easier. I also don't know your motivations. I don't know the first thing about you. I'd like to trust you to take care of that district, but I'm not giving you my backing until I'm sure about you. Tsukauchi responded coolly, not rising to the bait of Ivy's accusatory tone. Your support? That's pretty vague, detective. I'm not looking for a cheerleader, nor your approval, they shot back. Well, should you ever find yourself caught, I could do my best to bail you out. I imagine you don't have much in the way of backup, do you? I can't promise you a get-out-of-jail-free card, but my word has some sway around here, he said. That must be worth something to someone who goes around breaking the law every night, right? Ha! Oh, silly detective. I'm not worried about jail. You couldn't pin a damn thing on me, even if you wanted to. Try again. What the hell was that supposed to mean? They had plenty to pin on them. Hundreds of calls over the last 10 months. Pretty clearly pointed to vigilantism. You don't get caught in the wrong place at the wrong time that consistently. Whatever, putting that question aside for a different time, what else could he offer? I know you're paying for minutes just to make calls to us, so I could continue to fund that if need be. He was really grasping at straws now. It was 3,000 yen. How tempting could that offer really be? All right. I'll listen to your questions, but I don't guarantee any answers. That worked? All right. Kami. He wished he could do this in person so he could tell if they were lying. Whatever. Maybe he could get an age range based on how they answered the questions. Fair enough, Ivy. Can you tell me what your motivations for this vigilante act are? Start off broad, nothing too invasive. Get them talking. My motivations? This place is a shit show. I live here. I'd like for it to be less of a shit show. That was not a helpful response at all. I'm sure there are a lot of people would like Uptown to be less of a shit show, Ivy. What makes you different? You're putting quite a lot of effort in for very little, if any, returns, he pushed. What are you going to make me defend? What? Are you going to make me defend being a good Samaritan? I do it out of the goodness of my heart. How about that? What more do you need to know? Ivy snipped back. They were starting to sound a little irritated, but that still didn't answer his question. I find that hard to believe, Ivy. Most vigilantes do it for the publicity, to make a point, ulterior motives, and all that. You're telling me you don't have any other reason to spend countless unpaid hours putting your life and freedom on the line besides being a good person? Tsukauchi continued to poke, hoping to get more of a reaction. Do you think heroes are all so altruistic, Tsukauchi? No, but they get paid and they get recognition, he countered. You can get paid to do a lot of things, and underground heroes exist too. Not everyone's in it for the fame and money. Why do you do your job, detective? That's not exactly the easiest career path. Did you end up in that position by mistake, or did you do it because you wanted to? Oh, they were poking him right back. He could play into that. Of course I didn't end up here by mistake. What? Ivy cut him off. Well, there you go. I do it because I want to. Now, will this conclude our game of 20 questions, or Tsukauchi didn't think he was going to get any more out of them if he kept pushing? It'd be better to just let it be for now. If he was going to be paying for their phone, then they would be able to talk again. He wanted them to trust him, so he decided to be honest. I have a feeling you're not going to answer my questions anyway. I'll keep in touch. Pleasure doing business with you, detective. Ivy responded in a chipper tone before hanging up on him for the second time. Kami, what was he getting himself into? End of chapter.